Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Well, this is part 2 of our journey through the timeless lanes of Rajasthan, where every sunrise carries a promise, every haveli guards its secrets, and every heart waits quietly for its second chance. In the previous chapter, we met Nirvan, a silent caretaker of an ancient haveli, a man who had long buried his hopes beneath routine and remembrance. We also met Ahana, whose laughter entered his life like the first rays of dawn. And somewhere between a bustling bazaar and an old banyan tree, a mysterious wanderer left behind a single thought: everyone is given another chance. Today, that chance begins to unfold. As friendships deepen, smiles become easier, silences become comfortable, and two souls begin to discover that healing rarely arrives with great fanfare. Sometimes it arrives over a cup of tea, a shared sunrise, or the quiet naming of birds by an old pond. So settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and allow yourself to wander once again through the sandstone courtyards, the vibrant bazaars, and the golden mornings of Rajasthan. This is the second sunrise. Part 2: The Girl Who Loved Sunrises. Well, they met again 3 days later, or rather, Ahana found him. Nirvan had just finished bargaining for lamp oil when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "I knew it!" the voice exclaimed. He turned. It was Ahana. She folded her arms triumphantly, and she said, "You do come to the bazaar." Well, he replied quietly, "I never said I didn't." She smirked at him and said, "You implied it." He thought for a bit. "I don't think I said enough to imply anything." She wagged a finger at him and said, "Exactly. That is your problem. You answer questions with as few words as humanly possible." He smiled at her. "You've noticed." She leaned closer and whispered, "I notice everything, except where I leave my earrings." That became their rhythm. They never planned to meet, yet somehow they always did. Once near the spice merchants, yet again near the spice merchants, once beneath the old clock tower. Another time because Ahana was passionately defending a stray dog accused of stealing samosas. She was shouting, "The poor fellow was hungry." The shopkeeper yelled back equally loudly, "He stole 3." And not to back down, she said, "Exactly, he has ambition." The shopkeeper threw up his hands. Nirvan quietly paid for the samosas. As they walked away, Ahana nudged him. "You're too kind." He paused for a bit and then replied, "No, I'm not. I'm practical." She turned to him and asked him, "There's a difference?" "Well," he said, "there is if you're paying for stolen food." Slowly, without either of them noticing, their meeting stretched longer. A cup of tea became an hour became an evening. And one evening she dragged him to watch a puppet show. The puppets danced like tiny kings and queens beneath colored lanterns. Children laughed, drums echoed through the square. Halfway through the performance, Ahana laughed so loudly at one joke that even the puppeteer stopped to laugh at her. Nirvan watched her more than he watched the show. Her. She laughed without embarrassment. She cried during sad stories. She applauded street musicians whether they played badly or whether they played well. She seemed incapable of pretending to feel anything, and it fascinated him, because he had spent the last year pretending not to feel anything. One afternoon, they wandered through rows of fabric merchants. She held up an embroidered shawl and asked, "Too expensive?" He nodded his head vigorously. "What about this one?" she asked. "Also?" "And then this?" The shopkeeper is pretending it's silk. She looked impressed. You know cloth too? I buy uniforms for the staff, he said. She laughed. You know everything. He replied quietly, No, I just notice. She suddenly stopped walking and said, Well, that's your gift. And he replied, What is? Most people look, she said quietly, looking into his eyes. You see. Well, he thought to himself that he had never thought of it that way. One evening, they walked along the outer walls of the haveli. The sandstone glowed orange beneath the setting sun. The breeze carried the scent of wet earth from distant irrigation canals, and children flew kites from nearby rooftops. For several minutes, they simply walked, in total silence. Finally, Ahana broke the silence. Everyone loves sunsets. They're beautiful, they're predictable. He looked at her and smiled. I prefer sunrises. Why? Well, she replied, Because sunsets are endings and sunrises make promises. Nirvaan smiled. I've never heard anyone say that before. She smiled and said, That's because everyone else is asleep. Now a glint of mischief in her eyes. Tomorrow, before dawn, meet me here. He almost didn't go. A sensible part of him insisted that this was foolish. He had work, responsibilities, and routine. Yet, there was something stronger inside that kind of carried him there. When he arrived, she was already waiting, holding 2 steaming clay cups. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. He replied, I wasn't either. She handed him the tea, and together they climbed a small rise overlooking the desert. The world was still. No voices, no carts, and no temple bells. Only the faint whisper of wind moving through the dry grass. And then slowly, the horizon began to glow. A thin line of gold that slowly became amber and then crimson. The desert awakened one color at a time. Both Ahana and Nirvaan watched silently. After several minutes, she whispered, That's my favorite sound. Nirvaan frowned. There isn't any sound. She was indignant, saying, There is. It's the world deciding to begin again. He looked at the sunrise and then at her, and for reasons he couldn't explain to himself, he actually believed her. Their favorite place soon became an old pond beyond the town. Fed by an ancient stepwell, it attracted birds from hundreds of miles away. Ahana insisted every bird deserved a better name. That one, she pointed proudly, that is the royal inspector. Nirvaan laughed. That's not a royal inspector, that's a painted stork. And that, she said, that's the philosopher. Purple heron, came a quick reply. What about the little blue one? Kingfisher. She sighed dramatically. You ruin all my names. I saved the birds from embarrassment. She picked up a tiny pebble and tossed it harmlessly into the water. She said, I like my names better. I know, he said, but they're completely wrong. She was quick to reply, saying, They're imaginative. He said, I'll take that. And after a pause, she asked, How do you know all this? He shrugged. When you spend enough time alone, you begin noticing small things. She looked across the pond, staring into the distance. No, I think lonely people don't necessarily notice more. They simply notice what everyone else is too busy to see. He didn't answer, but she was right. As winter slowly softened into spring, they wandered farther each week. The pond gave way to scrub forest. The scrub gave way to rocky outcrops overlooking the plains. One evening, they stayed longer than they should have. The light faded. Long shadows stretched between the acacia trees. Somewhere far away, a deep roar echoed. Ahana immediately froze. Nirvaan! What? He said. I think that's a tiger. He listened carefully. It might be a leopard. She laughed and said, "Oh, that's much better." She quietly stepped closer to him. "So if it's a tiger, you'll protect me?" He tried not to smile. "I suppose I have to." And she nodded solemnly at him. Good. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Another roar echoed. This time she grabbed his arm dramatically. Instinctively, he stepped in front of her. She waited for 3 seconds before bursting into uncontrollable laughter. "Oh, I wish you could have seen your face." "You're frightened?" he asked. "Not even slightly." He shook his head. You are impossible." "I've been told," she said quietly. And I believed every word he said. "I know. And I like that you did." For the first time in years, Nirvan laughed so hard that tears gathered in his eyes. He had to sit down to compose himself. Birds scattered from nearby trees. Even the pond seemed to ripple with amusement. Days became weeks, and the heaviness he carried for so long began quietly slipping away. The silence inside him no longer felt empty. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they walked without saying anything at all. Oddly, those became some of his favorite days, because silence beside Ahana felt completely different from silence alone. One afternoon, she stopped suddenly. "Nirvan, can I ask you something?" "You just did," he said. She rolled her eyes. "You know exactly what I mean." He smiled. "Go on." "You always look at the haveli, every single time we walk past it, and you never really look away." He hesitated. "It has been my home for many years. But what?" There was definitely a but. He looked toward the great sandstone walls glowing beneath the evening sun. "There are some places that teach you how to stay." She waited. "And they forget to teach you how to leave." She looked at him for a long moment and then quietly slipped her hand into his. Only for a second, and just long enough for him to realize she had done it. She gave it a little squeeze and then she let go. Neither mentioned it. But from that evening onward, they no longer walked with a careful distance between them. There was, however, one thing growing heavier inside Nirvan, a secret. Every evening he promised he would tell her. Tomorrow he would explain that he was only the caretaker. Tomorrow he would tell her about Meher. Tomorrow he would tell her why the haveli sometimes made him sad. But that tomorrow never seemed to arrive, because every time he looked at Ahana's smile, he feared it would disappear. He feared that once she knew the truth, she would begin seeing him as not Nirvan. So he remained silent, not out of deceit, out of fear. One afternoon, Ahana stood before the great gates of the haveli. She looked up at its towering balconies. "I've always wondered." She paused. "What?" "What does it look like inside?" Nirvan instinctively stiffened. "You've never been," she joked and then laughed. "No, My mother inherited it years ago, but I spent most of my childhood in boarding school and later in Jaipur. Whenever I came home, I never really explored it. She looked at him hopefully. Well, you live there, you must know every room. Nirvan smiled sadly. That's the funny thing. I probably know less than anyone. There are entire wings that I've never entered. She stared. You're joking. I wish I were. The great house stood silent behind them, its carved doors closed, its windows watching, almost waiting for them. Hana smiled. Then one day, let's get lost inside together. Nirvan looked at the ancient gates, then at the woman beside him. Somewhere in the distance, a warm desert breeze stirred the branches of the old banyan tree. And for the briefest moment, he could have sworn he heard a voice carried upon it. Everyone is given another chance. He didn't know it yet, but the chance was only a day away. That is the end of part 2.